So your group policy infrastructure has been deployed. It's been a couple weeks, right? And everything seems to be working correctly. Replication seems to be working correctly. But all of a sudden you get a phone call from a manager and says, hey, I've got this user and it doesn't appear that group policies are being applied correctly because they're getting something they shouldn't be getting, or they're not getting something they should be getting, such as a software deployment. Or you get a trouble ticket that comes through help desk saying, right, we've got this user out here. This user's supposed to have this configuration on the desktop and they're not getting it. And now it's your turn to troubleshoot why they're not getting that setting. So in this session, we're going to be looking at how can we troubleshoot group policy objects that aren't being deployed or being deployed inappropriately. So some things we're going to be looking at is, first of all, what are some of the issues that we've seen out there with group policies, or what are some of the symptoms and some of the problems, and then we'll look at some of the tools that allows us to troubleshoot the group policy environment. So first of all, right, symptoms. A group policy is not being applied whatsoever, whether it be to a computer or a user. Normally that's going to be something that's usually simple to troubleshoot initially, or simple to go out and figure out if it's wrong. If the user is not inside the appropriate OU structure, right, the user won't get the policy. Or if the computer is not in the appropriate OU structure, the computer won't get the policy. As an example, right, in my Active Directory structure here, I have an OU called Arizona Design and an OU called Users. And inside the OU Users here, I've got all my users. So let's say, for instance, I had a policy that was linked to the user's OU, and this user account here was not actually in the OU for users. And that policy was supposed to affect Deanne. As a result, Deanne doesn't get the policy because she was in the wrong OU. Doesn't matter how many times she logs on, doesn't matter how many times she restarts her computer, she's not going to get the group policy because she's not in the appropriate OU. The most common issue we have with a policy not being applied normally isn't a user, it's normally a computer. And what happens is when a computer gets joined to the domain, if it's not pre-staged, that computer is normally in the computer's container. As a result, the computer is not in the right container, the group policies don't get applied to the computer. So we also have to make sure the computer is in the appropriate container. Otherwise, we see situations where the policy doesn't get applied. So with that said, all right, that's normally the issue. Inconsistent policies are being applied. Right? Normally one of a couple things, or actually going back to not applied real quick, they're also going to be not applied because of a security filter. You have deployed a policy that is only supposed to hit non-managers, and a user's not getting the policy being applied to them, and you go check and you find out that they weren't actually in the non-managers group. As a result, they don't get in. And when we get into the tools, we'll see how that actually is displayed. Inconsistent. I've got two domain controllers. The user logs on, the computer starts up, they get authenticated by this domain controller, they get the policy. They log in next time, or the computer gets authenticated next time, they hit this domain controller, the policy settings are gone. What's happening now is we have a policy replication issue, right? The policy is on this machine, so they got it when they authenticated. It's not on this machine, they didn't get it. Now we have a group policy replication. It could be at the Active Directory level of the actual group policy container, which is inside Active Directory that determines the version number, or it could be at the sysvol folder where we actually have the group policy template isn't being replicated properly. So it could be an Active Directory replication issue, or it could be a file services replication issue, depending on where the problem resides. Finally, we're not getting what we expect. Right? Again, this is normally as a result of loopback processing. So we have the ability inside group policies, and we've seen this in other sessions, that we can set settings at the computer level and the user level. So in this situation I've got here, when a computer starts up, it'll process the group policy on the computer. And let's say the specific line item is setting a proxy setting. Right? And that proxy setting happens to be in the user portion of the policy. Well, when the user logs on down here, right, if that same line item is set in a policy applied to that user setting, this policy wins. So now we're not getting predicted results because, right, we thought the computer policy was going to win. So in the event the computer and user are in different policies, right, the user wins. But here's the situation. There's this feature called loopback processing. It could be configured on a policy linked to the computer's container here. So now what happens is the computer starts up, we process all the policies on the computer, the user logs on, we go back, process all the settings on the user, then we go back and we reprocess whatever policy is set at the computer for processing. As a result, the user's not getting the settings that we thought they were going to get because the computer setting overrode the user setting. So let's take a real quick look at, in a group policy object, where that loopback processing is set. So if I come into my Active Directory environment, my group policy environment, and I'll go ahead and delete this for now. If I come into my domain, expand my domain, I come down into group policy objects. I actually have a group policy object here called Enable Loopback Processing on Kiosk Computers, and it's currently linked to the design computers container. Right? If I come in here and I look at this policy, if I come in under the computer, under policies, under administrative templates, right, under system, under group policy, long way down in here, you'll find a policy over in here. It says configure user loopback. So I'm going to scroll down through here. It used to be called just loopback, but Microsoft added the word configure to it. So we got configure user group policy loopback processing, right? And if this is enabled, there's two modes. There is a merge mode and replace mode. What's the difference? Merge mode. I read the computer policy, user logs on, I read the user policies, I go back, reapply that computer. That's merge. Replace. I could apply the computer policies. When a user logs onto that computer and that computer only, or a computer that has that policy, all the user policies are ignored. Right? Most common use of a replace loopback policy is on a kiosk. Normally, it's going to be merge. But you need to be aware of those settings are there when a computer starts up, so you're aware of that environment. So that's the loopback, and that can cause some of our inconsistent policies. So moving on with some of the troubleshooting tools, right? Server 2012 and Windows 8 remote server administration tools running the group policy management console gives us a really cool new tool, and this is by far awesome. In previous operating systems, if I wanted to check replication between domain controllers, I had to use a command line tool called GP tool. And what GPO tool did was it allowed me to go out and query the status of group policies on two machines and tell me whether or not the group policies were up to date. In Server 2012, if I come up to my domain level, right, and I secondary click on it, I now have this new status tab. Right? This is always going to connect to the machine that's running the PDC emulator, in this case Server 1. If I come down and I say detect now, it'll go out and it'll tell me, are there any domain controllers that are currently in the replication status? In other words, they're currently replicating. And then it shows me if there's other domain controllers in the environment and they're synchronized. What this just did was, it went to the PDC emulator and it said, all right, every domain controller in the enterprise, I want you to, or pardon me, in the domain, I want you to synchronize group policies right now, and I want you to tell me what version numbers you have of every single group policy. Well, folks, right, I have only 7 group policies here. Right? I only have the 7 group policies. Notice that did not take very long. If you have dozens of group policies or hundreds of group policies, this actual detect now could take a little bit of time. Here's what I don't like about detect now. I close the group policy interface, and I open it back up. It does not store the information. This is session persistent. So if you close the session, it loses the data. What's also cool about this is, let's say I think I'm having problems with an individual policy. I can go to that individual policy under the group policy objects. I now have a status tab. I can do a detect now, and it gives me the same information that tells me whether or not that one policy is up to date or synchronized on every domain controller in that domain. If I go to where that policy is linked at and select the policy, right? Notice I don't have the status tab. I don't have a status tab. So, right, that's troubleshooting. That's the new features that are in the group policy interface. There is also a new feature in the group policy interface, right? Let's say, for instance, I've just refreshed the policies, right? And I want users to fill those policies right now. If I do a right click on my container that has group policies in it, there's obviously what's called a group policy update. What this does is it goes out to all the computers that are in this OU and tells every one of those computers in that OU, it actually runs a little PowerShell, all right, invoke on a PowerShell, invoke-gp update. And what that does is, on any user that's logged on any computer inside that OU, it forces an update of the group policy objects in that OU. Here's the issue. If I go to an OU like groups here where there is no computer, and I secondary click and I say update group policy, it'll come back and tell me, hey, right, we're going to update, but it comes back and says no computers are found in that object. If I come up to design and my computers are under design, right, notice it says it only actually found one computer in the entire OU structure. Do you want to force an update on that computer now? And if I hit yes, it goes out and forces a GP update on that one machine that's in that OU structure. Something we've asked for a very, very long time, the ability to do a remote refresh of group policies. If I want to predict what policy a specific user would get, right, when a user logged on, inside the group policy management console, we now have what's called group policy modeling. This is not new. This has been here ever since Microsoft introduced the group policy management console. So if I come down to group policy modeling, I secondary click, do a group policy modeling wizard, next. I can pick a specific domain controller, or I can let it pick on its own. I'm going to go out and I'm going to snag a specific user, and I'm going to grab Deanne. Right? So I'll check the name, right? And I'm going to have Deanne log on to my Win7 box. Now, my Win7 box is actually a demo box. It's actually a computer account where the computer itself doesn't actually exist. So I hit OK. So this could actually be a phantom computer or even a phantom user that are in the appropriate groups, as long as in an appropriate OU structure. I hit OK. I hit next. It then says, do I want to simulate a slow network? Do I want to simulate loopback processing? Do I want to simulate putting the computer or the user in a specific site, or let it determine the site based off of its OU structure? I can simulate moving the user and or computer to a different OU structure. This is the current structure they're in. I can simulate adding and removing them from Active Directory groups for both the computer and the user and the computer. I can simulate WMI filters against the user or WMI filters against the computer. I hit next, and then it goes out and runs. And it gives me a nice document. First of all, it comes up and tells me what policies were applied. If I come in under details, it'll actually come in and it shows me computer information about the computer. If I look at component statuses, it shows me that group policies were successful. If I come on down, right, under Windows settings, it shows you what settings were actually won based off of the policies that were being applied. And it would show me actually what the setting is based off the policy that was being applied. It'll show me group policy objects that were applied. It'll also show me group policy objects that were not applied, and they may not be applied because they were empty. And then if I scroll down, it shows me the user that logged on, right? It shows me the policies that were being applied, in this case a software policy, right? It shows me that they have the software deployment that was being applied. And if I come down here, it shows these three policies here were not being applied because of security filters. And notice it says access denied. This disable reg editing tools was for my temporary and contract employees. And this one here was for my non-managers. Again, access denied because of a security filter. And then if I come down and I look at the default domain policy, it actually says, right, not applied because it was empty. So then I can come over under the query and it tells me again what I actually set the query up to run. If I come over and I look at the actual policy itself, notice the one was remove run, I can actually, if I come in under details, under the scope, it actually shows me that this was removed because of, right, the security group, AZ non-managers. Deanne is a manager, she's not in this group, that's why that policy was not applied. So that is running the GP modeling. We also have a tool called GP results. Right? I get a phone call, right? And it says, hey, I've got this user, his name is Rick. He is logging on computers inside the OU, and he has the run command. And I know as a non-administrator or as a non-manager, Rick shouldn't be getting run. Why is he getting run? So what I can do is I can ask, hey, what computer did Rick log on to? And they'll tell me Rick logged onto the Win8 box. So I come down under GP results, and I can do a new group policy results wizard, and I'm going to go out and say I want to connect to a specific machine. In order to connect to that machine, there are some requirements. Right? First of all, on that machine you're attempting to connect to, the WMI, remote administration, has to be turned on, and also remote management needs to be turned on with Windows RM. Otherwise, group policy will not be able to connect to that machine. So I hit next. It takes a few seconds. It's going out to that Windows 8 box right now and going, all right, Windows 8 box, give me a listing of the users that have logged on to you in the past. And it'll come back, it'll give you a listing of all the users that have logged on to that machine in the past. Now, depending on the number of users and on the amount of your network traffic, this may take a few seconds. And I'm running this, all in a virtual environment, so it took a few seconds. And so I'm going to go out and grab Rick, because Rick's the one I'm curious about. I hit next. Now it's going to go out, it's going to query this user logging on this machine, next. And notice what it didn't do, it didn't give me an option to configure, are there WMI filters, or do I want to play with groups, do I want to move around the OUs, because I'm actually retrieving the results that Rick got. So I hit finish, and I get a summary. And again, the summary shows me what group policies may or may not be applied, right? And then I come in under details, and this is where it's really, really cool. Notice I come in here, it shows me, here's the computer information, right? And if I click on show, it shows me the groups that the computer was a member of. I come down, it shows me that group policies were refreshed properly. I come down under policy settings. This actually shows me all the settings that were configured on this machine under security settings. I've got my administrative template settings. So as I walk through here, this shows me exactly what got applied on the machine. Now notice it says group policies that were applied. The enable wait on network was applied at the computer level, but notice the AZ enable loopback processing was not on the computer. If I come over and look at this, why wasn't it applied? It wasn't applied for a security filter. In this case, I know because this Windows 8 box is not a kiosk, so I should not have got that applied. They weren't in that group. If I scroll on down, right, I've got my user interface. Again, the user logged on. I can show the groups. And right off the bat, if I really were paying attention to this, notice that the groups that they're a member of, domain users, everyone, users, authenticated users, the local group. Oh, wait a minute. I know I have a group called non-managers. Rick should be a member of that group. But right now, I'm not going to worry about that. I hit hide. I come down here, and I've got applied group policy objects is none. Wait a minute. A group policy called remove run should have been applied to Rick. But notice, it's falling down here under the denied, remove run. So if I do a show of the remove run, it says it was not applied because of a security filter. Rick was not in a group that this was set to be applied to. Notice I have the one here for managers. Wasn't applied to Rick because Rick's not a manager. And then again, the disable registry editing tools was for my temp and contract employees, wasn't applied. So the group policy object that was supposed to be applied wasn't applied to Rick because of the security filter. And I actually would have caught that one of two ways. Up here, right, when I looked at the groups that Rick was a member of, right, or down here as the denied policy. So I catch that one of either two ways. Really good information. Right? We also have a tool called GP Result. Right? If I actually go out to the Windows 8 computer and I bring up this command prompt, oops, I want Internet Explorer, and I bring up my command prompt. So on this command prompt, I'm logged in as Rick T. I can actually do a GP edit or GP result. And this will show me, oops, GP result space /R. And what this will do is, it will actually come here and it shows me, right, what group policy objects were applied to Rick. Again, here's only user settings because Rick is not a domain controller or a domain admin, so Rick won't see computer settings. But if I come down to Rick settings, it shows me the very last time this policy was applied, it was at 11:14 a.m. this morning. That was the last time Rick logged on, got authenticated, or a GP update was running. Notice he got authenticated from domain controller 2. So now if I actually went in and forced him to be authenticated by domain controller 1, he's getting the settings that he's supposed to be getting, I now know I've got a replication issue. Coming down, and it shows me the group policies that were not being applied. And again, the AZ remove run was not applied because of the denied, because of the security filter. While I'm here, I can see what groups was being applied. Again, I see Rick wasn't a part of the appropriate group. But what I want to do while I'm here is I want to show you a switch that Microsoft introduced in Windows Vista, the /H switch. Now, some book that you read will tell you this switch has gone away in Server 2012 and Windows 8. I want to show you it's not. So I'm going to create a file called demo.html. And when I hit enter, right, it created a file in my Windows directory for Rick. So I'll come into my folder structure here. And I'll come under my C drive, users, Rick T. I have this demo HTML. If I open this up, this looks a lot like what I saw in the group policy management console. It's more of a graphical. So now the other one told me what settings won or what group policies were applied, but not the settings. In here, I can actually go in and look what settings were applied. And again, I can't look at the computer because I didn't run this as an administrator. The issue is if I ran the group policy, the command prompt as an administrator, I would see the results down here for an administrator, not Rick T. So this is a really, really handy switch, right? The /H switch. They said it went away, but the switch has not gone away. Right? So what I would do now is I can come into this group policy object here. Notice that it's being filtered on non-managers. I can actually bring the properties up of the group, and I can see that, oh, wait a minute, Rick wasn't actually in the group. So I can actually add Rick to the group. And at the domain level, I can now come up here, right-click, group policy update, yes, right? I've just forced a group policy update on that Windows 8 computer that Rick is logged on to, right? It may take up to 10 minutes for the group policy refresh to occur, right? But then after that group policy refresh occurs, I'm going to go out and read the new group policies for Rick, and that run command is going to go away. So if I were to wait 10 minutes plus, forgive that buffer in there, and I reran my group policy results tool here, I would see that Rick actually lost the run command. So if I actually come in here now and rerun this, what I should see now is, notice that under the user, right, it's still saying remove run is still denied. The group policy hasn't refreshed out on the box yet. It hasn't picked it up. And again, that could take up to 10 minutes. What Microsoft did is they actually put it's a scheduled task to run on the machine, and they use a random number generator against the computers. That way, if there's 1,000 computers in that OU structure, 1,000 computers aren't hitting your domain at the same time. So again, that could take a couple seconds. Also have to wait for the replication change of group policies over to server 2. So it could take a few seconds, but notice that's a way of changing it. The last two tools we want to look at, there's one called GPO Fix, and this is on your domain controller. If I bring up my domain controller and I bring up my command prompt, and I'm going to run GPO Fix /?, right? Oops. Wow. Don't know why it's not coming up. GPO Fix is a tool, right, that allows us to reset the default domain controller policy and the default domain policy back to operating system default settings. So if I've gone in and I played with the default domain controller policy or the default domain policy and I've screwed them up and I don't remember and I haven't taken backups of them, this allows me to go back and reset those policies. And the last thing I want to talk about is the event viewer. There's two components to the event viewer. Actually, on the domain controller itself, if I bring up the event viewer on the domain controller, I can come down under the application services log, and I can look at the DFS replication log, and this will tell me whether I'm replicating between my domain controllers properly or not. Right? This is using the file replication service. And notice it looks like I've got an error here from 8 o'clock this morning, replicating the domain volume. And I know what that was is at 8:54 this morning, server 2 was actually turned off. Server 2 wasn't turned on yet. So that's why I'm getting that error. But this allows us to go in and actually replicate, check our replication data. If I come down under Microsoft, I come down under Windows, I will find a node called Group Policies. Okay. And this is an operational log that actually shows me when group policies were being applied. And notice it comes down here and says group policies were applied to this domain controller was at 12:17:53 this morning, or 12:17. What happens is every 5 minutes group policies are refreshed on domain controller. So if I come down, it actually says the group policies was completed at that time. So at time 12:22, group policies are going to come down again. So if I actually were to go down here and look and go back to 12:12, those policies were being refreshed every 5 minutes on the domain controller. If I were to go to this Windows 8 box and bring up its event viewer, and it's an app. Come on. View my event logs. Right. And under this box here, under the application and services, I have Microsoft, and this will show me the events for group policies for this individual machine. So this is where I can go in and see that at a certain time, at X time today, or a group policy wasn't being refreshed. I can't view it because it has to be an administrator to view that log. But this allows me to go back and view that log. So I may see on here that maybe this computer account has actually timed out an Active Directory, or the computer account has lost its security association with Active Directory, and as a result, right, this user's been eating cache credentials for the last month. As a result, that might be the reason why Rick's getting the run command. So this allows me to go in and see when was the last time group policies were refreshed. So Event Viewer is another tool that allows us to troubleshoot our environment. So in this session, some of the things we looked at are some of the common symptoms that we see when we have issues with group policies not being applied or being applied intermittently. Then we looked at some of the tools that we can use to troubleshoot group policies.